Alrighty guys, welcome to the sprawling Al Dhafra Air Force Base complex in the deserts of the United Arab Emirates, just outside of Abu Dhabi. We're here today to continue our definitive tutorial series for the DCS A-18C Hornet, now that it is 99% feature complete and very close to releasing out of early access as of early 2022. In this tutorial, we're going to be covering taxi and takeoff procedures for your copy of the A-18C Hornet. Our cockpit configuration picks up right where we left off in our definitive cold start tutorial video. If you haven't seen this video, a link will be pinned in the comment section down below and in the description of this video. A quick look around the cockpit will show you guys that everything is exactly where we left off in the cold start tutorial. The aircraft is ready for us to go ahead and advance the throttle and start our taxi towards the runway. But because we're a professional pilot, we have a few administrative tasks to take care of first. We've already contacted Al Dhafra Clearance Delivery, and they've given us a departure procedure to help us deconflict with civilian traffic arriving and departing from Abu Dhabi International Airport. Departure procedure reads as follows. On takeoff, turn left heading 290 degrees, climb maintain 5,000 feet on the 290 degree radial from the Al Dhafra TACAN station until 15 DME, then continue on course. So, that may sound complicated, but we'll go ahead and input the inputs required for us to fly that departure procedure as accurately as possible. So we'll go ahead and come to our UFC. We'll turn on our TACAN, we'll clear out the channel 1 and enter 96, currently on X-ray and on transmit receive with our TACAN equipment turned on. We know that we're locked on to the appropriate TACAN station because we see the TACAN symbol on our HSI right next to our aircraft, which is the TACAN station here at Al Dhafra. We're going to go ahead and box TACAN to make TACAN our primary navigation method and get navigational information from the TACAN up on our HUD. We're now going to input the 290 degree radial onto our HSI to give us a graphical representation of that radial by holding the course knob on the top right of the MPCD. If we hold it for long enough, we'll see course select pop up on the ODU of the UFC. If we click the ODU option select button and then enter 290 and enter onto our UFC keypad, we will then see the 290 degree radial is now popped up and populated on our HSI. We can cross-check this by seeing that the arrow is now pointing at 290 degrees, just 10 degrees past the 300 degree radial, and of course we've got west right here. Now, our waypoint 1 for our waypoint navigation is actually going to be superseded by our DP, so we'll go ahead and push our waypoint up to waypoint 2, so that way when we reach 15 DME on our departure procedure, all we have to do to continue on course is just simply box waypoint. Zooming out here, a couple things to be aware of when you're taxiing in DCS World, or if you're even taxiing in real life. You always want to keep it nice and slow. Think of your aircraft taxiing around as more akin to a freight train than a sports car. You do have wheel brakes, you do have toe brakes, you may even have heel brakes in your airplane. However, your airplane will not slow down very quickly on a taxiway. So just keep that in mind. We're going to be approaching our procedures today as if we were in a heavily populated multiplayer server or in one of my DCS World missions that I curate for my community. One of the things that I highly recommend is always turn down your HUD brightness. Most of the symbology that you see on your HUD you really don't need when you're actually taxiing around, and the symbology can block your way in seeing obstacles that may be in front of you as you're taxiing around. In the DCS FA-18C, as well as the real aircraft, your pitot-static airspeed, indicated airspeed on your HUD, bottoms out at 48 knots. I recommend taxiing about 15 knots in the FA-18C Hornet. So how do we see 15 knots in the aircraft if our indicated airspeed bottoms out at 48? Well, we can always pull up our HSI on one of our DDIs to make it a little bit easier to see, and we can use our ground speed readout just to the right hand side of our aircraft symbol on the HSI to actually see how fast we're taxiing down the taxiway. Keep in mind also that our true airspeed from our pitot-static system also bottoms out at 70 knots. If you want more information about true airspeed, ground speed, and indicated airspeed, check out my tutorial video on that topic, which is linked in the comments section down below. Alrighty, so with that out of the way and our HUD brightness turned down, we are absolutely ready to taxi. So we'll go ahead and contact ALDA for ground. We would say to ALDA for ground who we are, what we're doing, where we are, and what we would like. So we'd say something to the effect of the ground controller as to, this is Spud 11 flight of 2 FA-18s at the southeast soft shelters, ready to taxi to the active. The ground controller will now come back with the taxi instructions for you. He'll say Spud 11 in flight, taxi to runway 31 left via Yankee uniform. At which I would read back those instructions, so that way we're all on the same page. I would say taxiing to 31 left via Yankee uniform. If my readback was incorrect, they would give me the instructions again and I would read it back to them again to ensure that everybody is on the same page. We're of course going to want to turn off our parking brake with just a nice left click to click off the parking brake. Keep in mind, to turn the parking brake on in the FA-18, you need to click and then use your mouse wheel to mouse wheel back to turn it on. Hovering your mouse over it also gives you some nice instructions. We're going to use our undesignate / nose wheel steering button on our stick to put the nose wheel into high gain for tighter turns. This is incredibly important when you're taxiing around on an aircraft carrier and you have to make those very sharp hairpin turns just inches away from things like JBDs and other aircraft and even personnel and tugs on the deck of an aircraft carrier, where those inches matter between life and death. So we'll go ahead and very gently advance the throttles and we'll start to taxi out. It's very important to have studied an airport diagram prior to asking for taxi instructions, so that way you know exactly where you're going on the airport. That reduces confusion and reduces the potential for a catastrophe to happen with two aircraft running into each other. We're now going to turn on nose wheel steering high gain. We're going to press and hold that undesignate nose wheel steering switch. So that way we can make it around this very tight turn to get out towards taxiway Yankee. When you are in a multiplayer server, especially one that is heavily populated, or in one of my curated Spuds Sunday missions, give a wide berth around other aircraft around you. For two reasons. Reason one, which is of course the realistic reason, is, like I said earlier, think of your aircraft more akin to a freight train while taxiing than a sports car. You cannot stop on a dime. So give aircraft around you a nice wide berth, so that way you don't run into the back of any other aircraft that you're taxiing behind. We're going to use our high gain nose wheel steering to stay on the center line here, as that turn was a little tighter than I anticipated. Another reason is because of the DCS World netcode. If there's any kind of lag or anything like that as you're taxiing behind another aircraft, any lag may cause some slight rubber banding, which has obviously gotten much better as DCS World's multiplayer netcode has advanced as of DCS 2.7 and later iterations. But it can still happen, and you may inadvertently, through no fault of your own, run into the back of another aircraft, or someone may run into your tailpipe as well. This can be avoided by having all pilots on the server try their best to give as wide of a berth as possible to any other aircraft around them while taxiing. So we'll go ahead and smoothly advance the throttles here and get up to about 15 knots of ground speed. While you're taxiing, you want to make sure you keep your eyeballs outside of the cockpit. You should have your radios already set, your navigational equipment already set, any weapons or other auxiliary systems already set during your cold start procedure, and so you do not want to be looking down in your cockpit where you can lose track of where you are on the airfield and potentially cause a mishap by running into an obstacle or another aircraft. We can see by these signs we are on taxiway Yankee. Any taxiway signage with a black background and yellow lettering is where you are. Any taxiway signage with a yellow background and black lettering is where you can go. So if we could go left onto, say, Delta 3, it would have a yellow background with black lettering. They got a little bit slow there, so that way we could take a look at those taxiway Yankee signs a little bit easier. So we're back up to 15 knots of ground speed. As we can see, that velocity vector right there in front of us on the center line, if it were super bright, would actually impede our ability to potentially see other aircraft taxiing on the center line in front of us, especially a little F-16. I've run into these kinds of situations quite a bit in multiplayer servers. And we have two taxiways labeled as uniform up here, a high-speed exit as well as an entrance to the runway. You can take off on either one, however it's better to go to the one that comes in at a 90-degree angle. So there is the high-speed exit, labeled uniform. And here is a perfect example of the signage of where you can go. We have yellow background and black lettering. Taxiway Oscar would be a 90-degree turn to the right-hand side over to these shelters and hangars. Taxiway Uniform is a 90-degree turn to the left-hand side following the signage of the arrows. As you're taxiing, you always want to make sure you are staying on the center line. In the FA-18C, this is very, very easy because the nose wheel is right underneath your butt in the ejection seat. We always want to stay on the center line in case we do have some sort of an issue with, say, our brakes, or you have a control input issue with your rudders or anything of that nature. If you're in the middle of the taxiway, you're less likely to run off the taxiway and get stuck in the dirt if you're on the center line. If you're veering off the center line, you may find yourself more likely to get stuck in the dirt. This would be a career ender if you are a real pilot, and it was found to be pilot error, but in DCS World, it's always good to try and fly as professionally as possible, because it's more fun that way, in my opinion. Alrighty, coming up to the runway signage here, we can see we've got the runway signs. We can enter runway 13 right and runway 31 left. Remember that runway numbers correspond to their headings, roughly. There can be a couple degrees off, and you'll see that on instrument approach charts. You can see the actual perfect heading of the runway. But these are rounded and they're good enough for VFR flight and the naming conventions of the runways themselves. So we're holding short of 31 left at taxiway uniform. We can see the hold short line out in front of us, which at this airport seems to actually be an ILS hold short line, so that's a little bit interesting, but it works just fine for us here in DCS. So we don't want to cross that line and enter into the runway unless we have permission from the tower. So before we ask for permission, why don't we go ahead and go through some last-minute checks on the aircraft. One of the biggest ones for us here in DCS World, and is something that a lot of DCS World players tend to forget about, is our takeoff weight. If we go to the checklist page from the support menu, we can see a readout of the aircraft's current weight, and we can see that fluctuating as we drop ordnance, use fuel, expend chaff and flares, all these kinds of things that would shed weight from our aircraft. The maximum takeoff weight for an A-18C Hornet is 51,900 pounds, so we want to make sure we're definitely underneath that. For takeoff in the F-A-18, as well as any other aircraft, the heavier we are, the longer our takeoff roll is going to be. So if you're on a very hot, very humid day, you're going to have a longer takeoff roll as well, compared to a cold and very clear day. In the F-A-18C, we want to start to rotate the stick back and bring that nose off the runway at about 120 knots. Most of the time, we should rotate off of the runway about 140 knots, which is also your approach speed for landing. So we'll go ahead and go back to our FCS now that we've checked our MTOW and make sure we're underneath that. If you're unsure of what the maximum takeoff weight for your aircraft in DCS World is, and you don't know it off the top of your head, you can always open up the radio menu, go to the ground crew, rearm and refuel, and the maximum weight down here is actually your MTOW, maximum takeoff. So this is something to be aware of, that you can always find it right there. And if you just hit cancel, you won't have to wait for the ground crew to change anything about the configuration of your aircraft. So, with that in mind, we'll go ahead and pull up the HUD repeater once again on our left DDI, and we'll go for our takeoff. We'll contact Al Dhafra Tower, and we'll say, Al Dhafra Tower, this is Spud 11 flight of 2 F-18s holding short of runway 31 left at uniform. And they will come back and say, Spud flight, this is Al Dhafra Tower, cleared to takeoff 31 left. And we will say cleared for takeoff 31 left for the readback. Alright, now that we have our takeoff clearance, we're going to go ahead and make sure that our ejection seat is armed. We're going to increase our HUD brightness to make it easier to see the symbology on the HUD, and do a quick sweep around our cockpit to make sure we are good to go. OBOGS is on, APU's off, we've got our lights on, we've got our landing light on, flaps to half, hook is set to field, launch bar retracted, select jettison is safe, engines are looking good, we've got our DDIs set up the way we would like to have them set up, we've got our altimeter settings good, everything's good to go, and coming down the right console, everything is good to go. So we'll go ahead and start to taxi on out. Now as we enter the runway, because we're flying a fast tactical jet today in the F-A-18C and in any other fast tactical jet in DCS World, you're going to get out of the tower's jurisdiction and into the approach controller's jurisdiction so quickly that you're going to get switched over to approach as you're entering the runway. And for today, we're just going to line up on the center line. If you guys would like to see a tutorial for formation takeoffs in the future, definitely sound off in the comments section down below. If you're flying in single player, the AI tends to taxi unnervingly close to your backside, but I have yet to have an AI wingman actually run into me, so just keep that in mind. We'll get nice and lined up on the center line here, and we'll put the brakes on. Now, just to review how this is going to go today, in order to reduce how much runway we're wasting due to engine spool up time, we're going to hold the wheel brakes set to full, and we're going to push the throttles up to full mil. The engine will start to spool up towards that full mil to a point where the brakes will no longer be able to hold us. At that point, we're going to release the brakes and push the throttles over the gates into afterburner, at which point we'll be accelerating very, very quickly down the runway. At 70 knots of indicated airspeed, once we get up to that, we want to make sure that we turn off our nose wheel steering. At that point, we're going so fast down the runway that nose wheel steering is going to make things so sensitive you're more likely to skid off the runway or flip the jet over entirely than be able to keep the aircraft under control. At about 70 knots of indicated airspeed, you'll have enough airflow over your tails that your rudders can aerodynamically help you keep on the center line. Please keep in mind that the undesignate nose wheel steering switch turns the nose wheel steering to high gain. A lot of new DCS World players will have mishaps by using that switch instead of the nose wheel steering disconnect switch. This is a very important distinction to make and can definitely save your life. So we'll go ahead and turn nose wheel steering back on. As we get up to 120 knots as we go down the runway, we're going to start to gently pull the stick back. We want to just gently bring the nose off the runway. We don't want to jerk it off the runway. We don't want to potentially accelerate stall our aircraft right off of the runway. We're then going to follow our departure procedure, making a gentle left-hand turn to 290 degrees and climb and maintain 5,000 feet until 15 DME from the Al-Dhafra TACAN station. So with that, guys, let's go ahead and hit it. Whipping up the throttles, we can see them spooling up. Release brakes, into afterburner. Airspeed is starting to come up. Nose wheel steering off at 70 knots. Using our rudders nice and gentle to keep us on center line. Gently pulling the nose back. And we're just going to gently fly the aircraft off the runway. Gear up, flaps up. I like to use the G key and the F key for the gear and flaps on takeoff because my hands are so busy just flying the aircraft, I don't want to take my hand off the stick to use the mouse. And we're going to pull the throttle back and maintain our speed restriction of 350 knots, which we've already broken. And we'll increase the HUD brightness a little bit to help us out. And past the departure end of the runway, we're going to make that nice gentle turn to 290 degrees. We'll open up the HSI on our left DDI to help us fly the 290 degree radial out to 15 DME. A little bit of right wing down trim. We have a slight asymmetrical loadout with GBU 38s and GBU 12s. We know we're flying on top of the 290 degree radial, as our aircraft symbol is on top of the line representing that radial for us. We're starting to get up there towards 5,000 feet, and we'll start bunting the nose down. Looks like we broke our altitude slightly. This is why you definitely don't want to be heads down while flying a procedure such as this, but we had to do it for the sake of demonstrating things for this tutorial. And there's about 5,000 feet. And we're looking for 15 DME from the Al-Dhafra TACAN station. And we can see that this departure procedure is taking us well away from the approach and departure ends of Abu Dhabi International Airport. And we've got a great view up here today. And there's 15 DME, at which point the approach controller is going to switch us off to our controlling agency for today's mission, likely some sort of AWACS controller or a GCI controller, and they have told us to go ahead and continue on course as fragged. So that means waypoint 2, so we'll start to come to the right hand side, and we'll start a climb up to our cruise altitude of 25,000 feet for today. Now that we're away from the terminal environment, we'll go ahead and start to get tactical with our jet. We'll bring up our radar in Twiz mode on our right DDI. Start to roll out. And we'll open up our EW page on our left DDI so that way we can be advised of any threats around us. And we can see that departure procedure brought us well clear of Abu Dhabi International, and has brought us way high above the approach and departure ends. We'll also go ahead and switch over our HSI to the SA page on our MPCD as we head into the clouds. So I hope this was a good demonstration for you guys to show you how to taxi and take off in the DCS A-18C Hornet. And if you liked the video, please give us a like and a subscribe. That always makes me feel good. And please fly safe out there, guys, and stay healthy as well. We shall see ya in the next one.